One of the most beautiful lines in what you have just sung, David, is that love just burns more brightly when life is cruel. And I know that that is the sort of peacemaking that you as a group, we as a class, have been discovering and forging. I want to thank the children here and thank their beautiful parents for bringing them here. And thank you for the way that children involve themselves into the process. When we had our vow taking just a few nights ago in beautiful Amadown, we had a lot of humour with us. It became evident that the trickster was in the room, and it brought such relief to the holiness which can become a bit contracted in its sort of intentionality. And I think again today we are seeing how flexible we need to become to work with what is really here. So a deep thank you to the children, to probably the grandparents as well as the parents, and a deep welcome of these angels who show us the future. I also want to note that in our prayers this morning when we gathered, before our ordinands arrived, one of our faculty, Sarah, included in her prayers that we pray for suffering, that we acknowledge suffering. And I really want us to know how welcome that is. Many of us have suffered very deeply. Many of us are suffering very deeply. And this work has to include the suffering. Again, that is the kind of peacemaking that we are talking about here. Some of us might not have known how we would get out of bed this morning to show up or to sing. And somehow we came here. And it is in our coming here together that somehow our suffering doesn't necessarily become bearable, but it is tethered to something other than our suffering. In a very intimate story of my own, a few weeks ago, I was in Cape Town. And I was there because my mum is not well. And on my last Sunday in Cape Town, I went to the cathedral, the Anglican cathedral, because I hadn't yet had a chance to see the African Madonna who is there. And I would hope that many of you might visit her. I stayed for the morning Eucharist, and in the pew leaflet, to my joy, there was a beautiful poem by Rumi, and I took that pew leaflet home to my parents for our Sunday lunch. And I decided for some reason to read the poem, which was all about the way that our responsibility is to take a step towards love, whether we call love God or the holy mystery, or we don't have a word for it, we might have a picture or a feeling. But Rumi's poem, which I haven't got with me, is all about all that is required from us is to step towards. And if we don't, nothing will happen. And when we do, it is beyond our understanding what meets us. And Rumi writes about the way that a baby cries to call its mother's attention, and it is the cry that opens the milk within the mother's breasts. If the baby doesn't cry, the mother might not know that it has a need. And so the prayer, the poem that Rumi writes is about having the courage to call out, to step forward, to call for help. And having read that poem around my family's lunch table, we entered a conversation where my mum was able to share with us that in her own sensing of her life force, she starts to feel herself moving towards another shore. And she wanted us to know that. And we cried a lot. And at some moment, my dad lifted his head and said, "We are crying out, aren't we?" We were in the experience of the Rumi poem. We were allowing ourselves to cry out in a moment of deep, deep sorrow, as well as encouragement of my mum's path. And it's one of those moments that I will never forget, because it teaches me, and that's why I bring it here, that this process of love that we are all seeking to learn arises sort of in our most ordinary lives. Here we are in this exquisitely constructed and beautiful and intended ceremony, and so far we're doing all right. But I bring that story of the poem and the Madonna and the table and reading the poem, not quite sure where I was, and finding why I was, and finding that it profoundly enabled those of us who were in that painful conversation to recognize that we were not alone, and that in our tears we were crying out, we were calling to love, to the beloved by all her, its, that's names, to come to us. And so in this extraordinary gateway that you have been navigating, and it's not linear, as you know, it's very squiggly and very messy, I really invite us to be open to the cracks, as Bayo Akomalafe so talks about. We're in times where nothing is working. The binaries and the linear and the structures, as we all can see, are falling apart. And the familiar answers are not going to be the ones that are going to help us. And we have to fall through the cracks to find a new way. So there is something about tolerating discomfort that I have seen you as a group engage with. A peacemaking that is not about a rarefied oneness state, but a peacemaking that is the gritty, often awful tolerance of difference. And I so celebrate your willingness, because as hard as it is, this is the pioneering work that OneSpirit is called to, and the peacemaking is to awaken. It is to awaken to this abundance of resource that is here from all the worlds, if we call out to it. There is so much wanting to work with us. And I have seen you practice that, and I know that you will continue to forge it with us. So our deep gratitude is to you and to all who have been supporting you. As at your vow taking, I remind you that we see your magnificence, we heard your vows, and we support you. All blessings in your leadership, in your own spiritual authority, and in the hard and beautiful work of forging your togetherness. Thank you.